Persecuted and Forgotten is a report on Christians oppressed for their faith. I'm Lorraine McMahon, and I have the pleasure of being Head of Operations to Aid to the Church in Need in Scotland. I'm sure most of you, like me, it's hard for us to imagine what it would be like to have to flee your home when terrorists and fanatics threaten to kill you because of your Christian faith. Yet, the witness of persecuted Christians who trust in God's love is a challenge and an inspiration to us all. Today, you will hear from Victoria Yohana, who escaped Boko Haram militants in northern Nigeria, from Father Ziyad Hilal, Aid to the Church in Needs project partner in Syria, and Father Douglas Bazzi, who survived torture by Al-Qaeda extremists and who runs 26 refugee centres in northern Iraq. Christians in areas with severe religious intolerance pay a heavy price for their faith, including physical torture, rape, imprisonment, slavery, discrimination in education and employment, and even death. These are just a few examples of the persecution experienced in the world that we live in. I'm going to invite John Pontifex to give us an introduction. John is the Editor-in-Chief of Persecuted and Forgotten. Welcome, John. Yeah.
Do I need that as well? No.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. Before I begin, let me prefix my remarks by saying that even before we started work on this report, it was clear from the evidence that persecution of Christians was the worst in the world. No other faith group has been experiencing as much persecution as Christians. These are not my words. These are the words that you would find in reports such as that by the International Society for Human Rights, based in Frankfurt, Germany. There are different numbers, different figures given for the percentage of attacks, religiously based attacks against Christians as compared with attacks on other faiths. But it's fair to say that the majority of them have said that 75% or even 80% of acts of religious intolerance have been directed against Christians. So it is against that backdrop that in 2013 we began the research for this particular edition of Persecuted and Forgotten. The report spans that 2-year period, beginning October 2013 and ending in June-July of this year. What we sought to do as we investigated the situation was to go to the very people who are experiencing this persecution through the networks that Aid to the Church in Need has in the 140 countries around the world where the charity is active. We are able to go face to face almost to the very people, be it priests, be it sisters, be it bishops, whose own testimony is reflected in the reports that you see before you in our executive summary. Now naturally, this report cannot possibly begin to look at 140 countries, but what it can do is to select those countries where persecution of Christians is particularly severe. What we see is not an exhaustive list of those persecuted countries, but a representative group. 19 countries have been selected, comparing the situation in 2013 with that of today. These are countries where Christians really do face potentially a threat to their very lives. where Christians have been killed, where Christians have been abducted, where Christians have been falsely imprisoned, where Christians have been denied legal protection and a fair hearing in courts, where Christians have been slated in the media, denied access to education, and indeed infringed at the workplace. And if you look at the countries that are in reports, which span anywhere from Nigeria or Eritrea, parts of the Middle East, Pakistan, India, and indeed China, we found that of the 19 core countries we reviewed, the situation had worsened in 15 of those countries. And that's all the more significant when, in our last report 2 years ago, we were saying that about 13 of those countries had deteriorated from when we looked at the situation before then. So we've seen this trajectory of decline. And it's measured in another way as well. If you look at the extreme category, where Christians really do face the very worst that violence and hatred can throw at them, we'll find that those in that category have risen from 6 to 10. So half of the countries reviewed have this extreme tolerance, which is driving Christians into potentially oblivion in certain places. So specifically, what then are our findings? Our findings are really summarized as follows. First, while it is true that Christians are killed, the predominant manifestation of persecution is a form of religiously motivated ethnic cleansing that is unfolding notably in the Middle East, but also in parts of Africa, and indeed we can also say parts of the Asian subcontinent, which is further driven by what can loosely be described as a cultural genocide, which seeks to eradicate the Christian presence culturally, at the very least, crosses, churches, structures, symbols, that, as we know from our media, have been potentially eradicated, indeed, in actual fact, eradicated. The primary response to that is the second finding. The primary response is exodus. The bishop quite rightly identified the number of people who fled. I think you said the figure 60 million. 60 million, a record. Now, within that is the Christian emigration, which is very, very serious. Just take one example, perhaps the most severe example, Iraq. We will hear from Father Douglas shortly. He will tell us more. But before the war in 2003, the fall of Saddam, in that period before, there were about 1.2 million Christians. The figures vary, a bit more, a bit less, depends on who you speak to. But now there could be as few as 250, some say 200,000 Christians. Now, if you look at that rate of decline, it's fair to argue, or indeed more than argue, to assert quite strongly that within a measurable distance of time, there will be no Christians left in Iraq. And we have put a figure, for the sake of argument, of 5 years. Now, who knows what will happen in a volatile situation, but if you remember that of those 200,000 Christians left in Iraq, 100,000 or more are displaced, looking for an exit from that country, you can see how perilously close we are to a country, Iraq, the cradle of Christianity, where there are no longer any Christians. This is a very serious moment in our international history, because Christians have been bridge builders. Yes, it's important for us as Christians to be worried about the decline of Christians, but it's a threat to the wider community, because historically, and particularly recently, Christians have played such a crucial role through schools, through peace-building initiatives, and through very many different forums by which they brought people together. And if that disappears, factionalism will grow. The evidence supports that. So we need also to reflect that Christianity is not just under persecution from Islamism, it's also under persecution from other forms of religious extremism. We haven't time to look at all that in great detail, but we'll just select two examples of that. In India, we've seen the rise of Hindutva, extremist Hindu movements that have put pressure on Christians and have, for example, burnt churches, attacked Christian demonstrations, and put a lot of Christians under pressure on the pretext that Christians are there threatening, as they would perceive it, to convert Hindus. On the pretext of that, they place a great deal of pressure. In Israel, touchy subject to mention Israel, but it needs to be said that Jewish extremists have attacked Christian communities and others, and the Church of the Multiplication of the Loaves, a church which ACN has helped support, has been attacked by extremist Jews. This is in the Galilee. Now, it's important to say that the majority groups, be it Muslim, Jewish or Hindu, abhor what is going on. But we see this splintering which is manifested in this extremism. There's also another third dimension, briefly, which is the rise of intolerance against Christians orchestrated by hardline communist or other authoritarian regimes, particularly China and also Vietnam. Just to pick an example, according to Christian China Aid, an organisation which aids the Church in Need has worked closely with, there were 572 cases of religious persecution affecting Christians in particular over the course of 2014. So what we're saying in this report is to underline that it's true that Christianity is the world's most persecuted faith group, and also that in parts of the world the Church is threatened with a very real possibility of wipeout. But we also, in the report, if I may draw to a conclusion, draw attention to the extent to which, in these times of darkness, the light of faith shines all the brighter. And we heard an example of that only today. Father Jacques Morad is a priest who I met in Syria 10 years ago. He has worked in Karatain, near Homs in Syria, which has been so much the news. And this priest was kidnapped on the 21st of May 2015. He was held for 84 days in Raqqa, which is the sort of headquarters of ISIS. Every day this man was told to convert on pain of death. We know this because he told us this only today. 5 days ago, last Saturday, he was released, or he escaped rather, dressed as an Islamist. Curiously enough, ironically, he made good his escape. And what he has said is that again and again, when he was threatened, he sought to be a person of peacefulness. When threatened, he was somehow peaceful, and that peacefulness was sustained through prayer and expressed in this calm, which clearly had an impact on his community, the community of extremists holding him. And it is true to say that at the point when they wanted to get rid of him, they were aware, these extremists, of the work that he'd done in Karatain, which Muslims had benefited from, as well as Christians. And it was that work which put pressure on the extremists to downgrade their treatment of him and allow him to return to Karatain and become free. So this is a message that we need to send out. Why should somebody like Father Jacques suffer this anyway? Why should so many others suffer? And the message that comes out from this report comes down to a simple question. How many more people, Christians and others, are to suffer martyrdom, be arrested unfairly, arrested without charge? How many more are going to be held and never seen again before this government and before other governments take seriously religious freedom and recognise it for what it is, namely a foundation of human rights. This is the question that we put as we lay this report before you. We thank you for coming, and I hope that you enjoy the report. There will be an opportunity to ask questions about it, but do have a look at our website, www.acnuk.org/persecution. There you will see the full findings of the report. You'll also see an interesting brief video, 6-minute video, which summarises the report. There's also the booklet, as well as the A4 executive summary. There is a booklet which tells the story of Ghazala and Victoria, those two from northern Iraq who stood up to ISIS and refused to convert, and who somehow escaped. Their story is told very powerfully there. There are others like them. It's a report that we really do commend to you this evening, and we look forward to talking about it further. Thank you very much.